Well, July is known as a savings month, and today in our personal finance segment, we take a look at some practical tips on how to save money in an economy that's seen South African consumers barely able to cope with their debt. Joining me for this discussion is Schalk Louw, who's a portfolio manager with PSG Wealth, joins us from our studios in Cape Town. Schalk, thanks so much for your time this evening. Let's start with the difference between saving and investing.
Well, I think, Siki, it's a very easy answer. That the one we're doing, the other one we're not. And clearly, if you look at our saving figures, if you look at our saving figures over the last 4 decades, I mean, in the 70s we were saving, I think, about 11% of our salaries, 5% in the 90s, and I think we're sitting at -2%. So yeah, I reckon there's still investments if you're looking going around, but saving definitely not.
So let's talk a little bit then about making this a habit, because obviously it's something that you've got to do for a long time. It's got to become second nature almost to a person. So how do you start?
Yeah, definitely. I think it starts with that famous Warren Buffett saying. He said that don't save what is left after spending. But rather spend what is left after saving. Now, that is where it starts. I mean, we've got to look at our spending patterns. And I mean, we join the rest of the world. We love spending. We love shopping. Yeah. And, while that is going to be there, we're going to struggle saving. We've got to set that, objectives, got to set our commitment out of, we are going to go saving. If we're not, we're going to struggle.
And a lot of people ask the question, so how do I do it? Where do I put the money? And it becomes a little bit difficult because there's so many vehicles out there for one to actually save. So let's maybe break it down. If you're saving for the short term, what are your options?
Your options is usually when you look at your short term, we're talking about a period of less than a year. Yeah. And that is typical. You're sitting in January after you just came back from December holiday, setting out and not just taking out the credit card next December and go pay for your holiday, but really set out that short term. And unfortunately, you can't have a fixed period product like an endowment policy or those type of things. You've got to look at your short-term vehicles like money market instruments, etc. Then your medium term, that's typically your, let's call it 3 to 5 years period. I mean, your children going to university in 5 years' time. There you're starting to look at your endowment vehicles, even your new tax-free investment plans. It depends on your discipline. I mean, that is what it actually comes down to. If you've got discipline to save, then you can use a vehicle that is not fixed. But if you don't have the discipline, then you unfortunately got to look at things like endowments, and then your long term is saving for retirement. There you must look at things like your retirement annuities, maybe your company provident fund, etc.
And the costs of saving, how does one determine what is actually going to cost them, particularly for the long term?
Oh, excuse me, just repeat that again.
The costs of saving, so the costs of the vehicles that one is using, what you need to pay for someone to administer your funds, for example, and to manage them.
Siki, I think that's the beauty of products in South Africa over the last, let's call it, I want to call it 2 decades, but most prominently the last decade. Products in general have become much cheaper. The cost of advice it's become more competitive, definitely more transparent, as it's become a lot more competitive. So your products from let's call it your typical endowment to a normal investment plan, like for instance a linked investment service provider, LISP, should not generally cost you much more. I mean, it should cost you the same amount. So it all depends on the product you're using. So, some products will cost you a little bit more, but they've got certain tax benefits that's attached to them that should see you benefit over the long term.
And talking about tax, obviously that's something one's got to give into consideration. A lot of people went into retirement annuities because of the tax benefit that comes from that. So what sort of consideration should you give to tax as you choose your savings vehicle?
I think it's a large consideration. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't help me being let's call it a paper millionaire, and then at the end of the period, I've got to pay tax, and it comes down to an amount much lower. So I would say, it definitely look at each product. You have to look at the tax. I mean, we've had in March, we've had this new lovely tax-free investment plan that was introduced purely for that reason, to give a tax benefit for people that want to save.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks for your time today. Schalk Louw is a portfolio manager with PSG Wealth.